Your Honor, she can have everything. That's what I said the moment the judge looked down at me over his glasses, waiting for a fight that never came. The room went still in that subtle way it does when people expect noise but get silence instead. My wife, Melissa, didn't even try to hide her smile. It was small at first, controlled, like she didn't want to seem too eager. But I saw it. 20 years of marriage teaches you the difference between a smile and a signal. That one was a signal. Victory, she thought. Complete and final. The kind of victory you don't just win, you walk away from richer, freer, and justified. Her attorney leaned in, whispering something into her ear, probably already calculating the assets, the accounts, the house on Cedar Ridge, the investment portfolio, the business I built from nothing. I sat there with my hands folded, posture straight, breathing steady, like none of it mattered. Like I had already accepted the outcome. And maybe that's what confused them the most. Because men in my position are supposed to react. They argue. They interrupt. They try to claw something back before it's too late. I did none of that. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't object. I didn't even look at her. I just listened as her lawyer laid it all out in clean, confident language, line by line, reducing 2 decades of my life into columns and claims. The house hers. The company, half, if not more. Retirement accounts, liquid assets, anything with my name on it, hers to take. It sounded thorough. It sounded airtight. It sounded like the end. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats. You could feel it in the air, that quiet judgment people carry when they think they're witnessing someone lose everything. And maybe I did look like that man. Calm. Still. Defeated even. But calm can be misleading. Calm doesn't mean empty. Sometimes it means finished. Sometimes it means the storm already passed and left something behind no one else can see yet. The judge turned back to me, pen in hand, ready to confirm what everyone in that room already believed. Mr. Carter, do you wish to respond to the petitioner's claims? He asked. His voice was neutral, professional. But there was curiosity under it. Because he saw it too. The stillness. The lack of panic. I met his eyes for the first time since the hearing began. No objection, Your Honor, I said. Just like that. Simple. Direct. Final. Melissa let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, like she had been holding it in for weeks. Maybe months. I imagined the conversations she'd had leading up to this. The certainty. The plan. The way she must have pictured this exact moment, me sitting there, cornered, watching everything I built slip through my hands. What she didn't picture was this version of me. The one who wasn't reaching for anything. The one who wasn't trying to stop it. The one who already knew how this would end. I shifted slightly in my seat, adjusting my cuff, the small kind of movement that doesn't mean much to anyone watching. But to me, it was a reminder. Of timing. Of patience. Of decisions made long before we ever stepped into that courtroom. The judge nodded, jotting something down. From the outside, it looked like paperwork moving forward. A formality. The final steps before everything changed. And in a way, it was. Just not in the direction anyone in that room expected. I let a few seconds pass. Long enough for the silence to settle again. Long enough for Melissa to fully believe she had already won. Then I spoke. Your Honor, I said, calm, steady, the way I'd practiced it in my head more than once. Before you finalize anything, I'd like to submit one document for the court's consideration. The clerk stepped forward and took the folder from my hand, the sound of paper against polished wood cutting through the silence sharper than any raised voice ever could. It was a simple folder. No dramatic labels. No thick stack of evidence. Just a few pages clipped together like they did not belong in a room where everything felt so final. The judge accepted it with a small nod, flipping it open with the same routine motion he had probably used 1,000 times before. But routine has a way of breaking when something unexpected slips into it. I watched his eyes move across the first page. Slow at first. Then stopping. Not long. Just enough to notice. Melissa shifted. Beside her attorney, her confidence still intact but now edged with curiosity. She leaned slightly, trying to catch a glimpse, but the angle was wrong. She could not see what I already knew. Her attorney cleared his throat softly, the kind of polite interruption professionals use when they want control back in the room. Your Honor, may I ask what document is being submitted? He said, voice measured, still carrying that same quiet confidence from moments ago. The judge did not answer right away. He turned one page. Then another. The silence stretched, not heavy, not tense, just different. Like the air had changed direction without anyone announcing it. Mr. Carter, the judge said finally, eyes still on the paper. This appears to be a trust instrument. I nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. Melissa's smile did not disappear, but it paused. Just a fraction. The kind of pause you would miss if you did not know her. But I did. I had seen that expression before years ago, when something did not quite fit her expectations. Her attorney straightened slightly. A trust? He repeated, as if saying the word out loud might make it less relevant. How is that applicable to the marital assets being discussed? That was the question. The right question. The one that assumed everything they had already presented still stood on solid ground. I kept my hands folded. It is applicable, I said, calm as ever, because the assets being claimed were transferred into that trust several years ago. There it was. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just placed into the room like a fact that had always existed, waiting for someone to notice it. The attorney's expression tightened, just slightly. He reached forward. May I? The judge handed him the document. Melissa leaned in closer now, her attention fully locked on those pages. I could see her scanning, searching for something familiar. A name. A number. A detail she could anchor to. But familiarity is a fragile thing when you realize you have been looking at the wrong version of reality. This trust, her attorney said slowly, reading more carefully now, was established 5 years ago? Yes, I said. 5 years. Long before the late nights. Before the sudden interest in accounts and balances. Before the questions that started sounding less like curiosity and more like calculation. Back when things were still quiet on the surface. And the primary assets listed here, he continued, flipping to the next page. The company, the real estate holdings. He stopped. Not because he did not understand. Because he did. The judge looked up again, this time directly at Melissa. Not with judgment. Just with awareness. The kind that comes when a case begins to move in a direction no one announced. Melissa's voice finally broke the silence. What is he talking about? She asked, sharper than before, the first crack in that perfect composure. I turned my head slightly, meeting her eyes for the first time that day. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Just with the truth she had not been expecting. I am talking about ownership, I said quietly. The kind that does not change just because someone asks for it. The room did not explode into chaos. It did something quieter. It recalibrated. You could feel it in the way people shifted in their seats, in the way the air seemed to settle into a new shape that no one had prepared for. Melissa stopped speaking, not because she had nothing to say, but because the ground beneath her argument was no longer steady enough to stand on. Her attorney leaned closer again, this time not whispering strategy, but confirming details, tracing lines across the document like he was looking for a flaw that would bring everything back to the version of reality they had walked in with. There was none. Not the kind they needed. The judge closed the folder halfway, not fully, just enough to pause the moment. Mr. Carter, he said, his tone measured but more deliberate now. This court will require a full accounting of the trust structure, including its formation, trustees, and beneficiaries. Of course, Your Honor, I replied. I had expected that. I had prepared for that. Preparation is not about reacting. It is about arriving early to a moment no one else sees coming. Melissa's voice came again, lower this time, controlled but edged with something new. You did this without telling me? She asked. There was no anger in it yet. just disbelief trying to find its footing. I did not rush to answer. Timing matters when the truth changes shape. I made decisions when I saw patterns, I said finally. She shook her head, a small movement, like she was rejecting the premise itself. Patterns of what? I looked at her for a moment, not as an opponent, not as someone across a courtroom, but as the person I had built a life with before everything started to shift. Patterns of questions, I said. About numbers. About ownership. About what things were worth instead of what they meant. Her expression tightened. Not because the words were harsh. Because they were accurate. The judge watched quietly, letting the exchange happen without interruption. Courtrooms are not just about law. They are about timing, about when to let silence do the work that arguments cannot. That does not give you the right to move everything out of reach, her attorney said, stepping back into the space, trying to restore structure to the conversation. Marital assets are subject to division regardless of internal arrangements if intent can be demonstrated. He was not wrong. That was the strength of his position. Or at least, it had been. Intent matters, I agreed. That is why the timing is in the document. He flipped back again, faster now, searching for dates, for sequences, for anything that would suggest reaction instead of foresight. 5 years, he said again, more quietly this time. Before any filing. Before any documented dispute. Exactly. That was the part that changed everything. Not what was done, but when it was done. Melissa looked between us, her confidence now replaced with calculation. She was no longer arguing from certainty. She was trying to understand the rules of a game she did not realize had already been played. So you are saying, she said slowly, choosing each word carefully, that everything I thought we owned, we never actually owned together? I let that sit for a second. Not to make a point, but because the answer deserved its weight. I am saying, I replied, that what we lived in, what we built around, and what we used every day, was real. But the way it was held was different. The distinction mattered. Not emotionally. Legally. Structurally. The judge nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that difference without stating it out loud. This matter will require further review, he said, making a note on the file. We will not finalize any distribution until the trust documentation is fully examined and both parties have had the opportunity to respond. A delay? Procedural. Expected. But the energy in the room had already shifted beyond that. Melissa leaned back fully now, her posture no longer forward, no longer pressing. She was thinking. Really thinking. Not about what she would get, but about what she might not. I adjusted my sleeve again, the same small movement, the same quiet reminder. Nothing about this moment was sudden for me. It had been built piece by piece, decision by decision, long before we ever walked into that courtroom. And as the judge closed the folder completely this time, one thing had become clear to everyone in that room, even if no one said it out loud. This was no longer a case about dividing what existed. It was about proving that it ever belonged there in the first place. When the hearing adjourned for the day, the courtroom did not empty with the same certainty it had filled. People walked out slower, conversations quieter, like everyone was carrying a version of the same question but did not want to say it out loud. I stood when the judge exited, buttoned my jacket, and gathered nothing from the table because there was nothing left for me to collect. Melissa stayed seated for a second longer than necessary, her eyes still on the folder as if it might open itself again and give her a different answer. Her attorney leaned in, speaking low, controlled, already shifting from confidence to strategy. That is what professionals do. They adjust. They do not panic. But adjustment takes time, and time was the one thing she thought she did not need when she walked into that room. I stepped into the hallway, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the muted echo of footsteps against tile floors. Court buildings all feel the same after a while. Clean, quiet, built for decisions that do not announce themselves until it is too late to change them. I did not rush. There was no reason to. For the first time in a long time, I was not reacting to anything. I was simply moving forward. Behind me, I heard her voice. Daniel. It was not loud. It did not need to be. I stopped, but I did not turn right away. Timing matters even outside the courtroom. I let a second pass, then another, before I faced her. She stood a few feet away, closer than we had been all morning, but it felt like more distance than that. You planned this, she said. Not a question. A statement trying to anchor itself. I looked at her, really looked this time, not at the version of her standing here now, but at the years behind it. The house on Cedar Ridge. The late nights. The early mornings. The conversations that slowly changed from how we were doing to what things were worth. I prepared, I said. Her expression tightened. That is not the same thing, she replied. I nodded slightly. It is when you see where things are going before they get there. She crossed her arms, a small defensive gesture, but it said more than her words. So you just decided to protect everything from me? She asked. There it was. The assumption. The center of it all. I shook my head once. No, I said calmly. I decided to protect everything from uncertainty. She let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. That sounds nice when you say it like that, she said. But you knew what you were doing. I did not argue that. There was no need. Yes, I said. Simple. Direct. Honest. The hallway felt quieter now, like even the building itself was listening. 5 years, she continued, her voice lower, more controlled now. You made those changes 5 years ago. That was before anything went wrong. I held her gaze. Nothing goes wrong all at once, I said. It happens in small shifts. Small questions. Small changes in what matters. She looked away for a moment, processing, not rejecting it, but not accepting it either. So what now? She asked finally, turning back to me. Not with anger. Not even with frustration. Just uncertainty. The same thing I had been preparing for all along. I adjusted my sleeve again, the habit grounding familiar. Now the court reviews everything, I said. Structure. Timing. Intent. She studied my face, like she was searching for something she used to recognize. And if they decide it still counts as marital? She pressed. I nodded once. Then it gets handled accordingly. Calm. Always calm. That was the part she never understood. Not because it was complicated. Because it was consistent. She shook her head again, softer this time. I thought I knew exactly how this would go, she admitted. I did not respond right away. Some truths do not need an answer. They just need space. After a moment, I said quietly, so did I. And that was the difference. She had expected an outcome. I had built one. The hallway stretched between us, long and quiet, filled with everything that had been said and everything that had not. And standing there, for the first time since she filed, it was no longer clear who was walking away with anything at all. The next hearing did not feel like the first. There was no quiet confidence in the room this time, no easy assumptions resting beneath polished words. Everything moved slower, more deliberate, like every sentence had to carry its own weight before anyone dared to believe it. Melissa arrived early. I saw her before she saw me, standing near the far wall, speaking with her attorney in low, focused tones. There was no smile now. No trace of the certainty she had walked in with before. Just concentration. Calculation. Adjustment. I took my seat without announcing myself, placing my hands on the table the same way I had the last time. Steady. Controlled. Familiar. The judge entered, and the room stood, then settled again into that measured silence that only courtrooms seemed to hold. We are here to continue review of the Carter matter, he began, his voice even, procedural, but sharper now. He had read the documents. That much was clear. Melissa's attorney stood first this time, no longer waiting to react. Your Honor, he said, we have reviewed the trust documentation in detail, and while we acknowledge its existence and structure, we believe there are grounds to challenge its application, in this case based on intent and equitable distribution. Strong words. Expected words. Necessary words. The judge nodded slightly. Proceed. The attorney stepped forward, holding the same folder that had shifted everything days before. The trust was established during the marriage. He continued. Assets that would otherwise be considered marital were transferred into it. While the timing predates the filing, we believe the intent was to remove those assets from future division. He paused, letting that settle. It was a good argument. Clean. Logical. Built on the assumption that preparation must mean avoidance. I did not interrupt. I let him finish. That was always the rule. Let them build the full version of their position before you change it. Furthermore, he added, the petitioner had no knowledge of this structure, which raises additional concerns regarding transparency within the marriage. Transparency. Another word that sounds simple until you look at what it actually means. The judge turned his attention to me. Mr. Carter, your response? I stood slowly, not rushed, not hesitant, just controlled. Your Honor, I said, everything stated is accurate in terms of structure. The trust was established during the marriage. The assets were transferred into it. And it was not something we discussed in detail at the time. I could feel Melissa's eyes on me as I spoke, not angry, not yet, just focused. Waiting. However, I continued, intent is not defined by secrecy alone. It is defined by timing, by consistency, and by purpose. The judge leaned back slightly, listening. The trust was created 5 years ago, I said. At that time, there were no legal disputes, no filings, no separation. The business was expanding, the assets were growing, and the decision to move them into a structured entity was made as part of long-term planning, not short-term reaction. I let that sit for a second before continuing. Every transfer was documented. Every step was recorded. There was no sudden movement of assets in response to this case because the structure was already in place long before the case existed. Melissa's attorney stepped forward again, ready to counter. But intent can still be inferred from lack of disclosure, he said. The petitioner was not informed, she was aware of the business structure. I said calmly, not raising my voice, just placing the correction where it belonged. She was aware that the company was reorganized. She was aware that external legal counsel was involved. What she was not focused on was the ownership framework itself. Silence again. Not empty. Active. The kind that forces everyone to think instead of react. The judge tapped his pen lightly against the desk, considering. So your position, he said slowly, is that the trust was established as part of standard asset protection and planning, rather than as a means to avoid future division? Yes, Your Honor. One word. Steady. Final. Melissa shifted slightly in her seat, her posture no longer defensive, but unsettled. Not because she did not understand what was being said. Because she was starting to see how it would be interpreted. The difference between what feels personal and what stands in law is not always comfortable. The judge looked between us, then down at the documents once more. This court will take into account both the structure and the timing of these actions, he said, as well as the awareness and involvement of both parties. He paused, then added, this matter is no longer a question of simple division. It is a question of classification. Classification. That was the word that mattered now. Not what existed, but what it legally was. I sat back down, hands returning to their place on the table, calm as ever. Nothing had been decided yet. Not officially. But something had already shifted again. Not in the documents. Not in the arguments. In the understanding. And understanding is where outcomes begin to form long before they are ever spoken out loud. The judge did not rush the next part. That was the first sign that everything had moved beyond routine. When a decision is simple, it comes quickly. When it is not, it takes shape in silence first. He set the pen down, leaned back slightly, and looked at both sides of the room like he was measuring more than just the arguments. Melissa sat still, but it was not the same stillness I carried. Hers was held together. Mine was settled. Her attorney adjusted his papers again, not because he needed to, but because movement gives the illusion of control when certainty starts to slip. Before we proceed further, the judge said, his voice steady but more deliberate than before, I want to address the issue of beneficiary designation within this trust. That word landed differently than the others. Beneficiary. It was not about ownership anymore. Not directly. It was about who ultimately stood to gain from what had already been structured. Melissa's head turned slightly toward her attorney, then back toward the bench. This was new ground for her. For them. For everyone except me. The judge flipped to a specific page, one I recognized immediately. Not because of the text. Because of the moment it was created. According to this document, he continued, the trust identifies a managing trustee and outlines conditions under which distributions can be made. Mr. Carter, can you clarify your role within this structure? I stood again, the motion controlled, familiar. I am not the direct owner of the assets, Your Honor, I said. I am the managing trustee responsible for oversight and operational decisions. He nodded once, then followed up. And the beneficiaries? There it was. The question that changes everything without raising its voice. I did not answer immediately. Not out of hesitation. Out of precision. The primary beneficiary, I said, is a future allocation structure tied to long-term continuity of the business and associated assets. The courtroom did not react with noise. It reacted with attention. Focus tightened. Even Melissa's attorney paused before speaking. Your Honor, we would request clarification on that statement, he said. It appears intentionally vague. It is structured, I replied, calm as ever. Not vague. The judge looked back down at the document, then up again, this time directly at me. Mr. Carter, for the purposes of this hearing, the court requires a clear understanding. Are there individual beneficiaries named? A simple question. A direct one. The kind that does not leave room for interpretation. I nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. Melissa leaned forward slightly, her composure holding, but just barely. Then who? Her attorney pressed, stepping into the moment before it could pass. The room felt different now. Not tense. Not loud. Just waiting. I looked at the judge, not at her, not at the attorney. The beneficiaries are defined within the trust documentation, I said. And they are not subject to modification through this proceeding. That answer did not satisfy them. It was not meant to. It was meant to establish a boundary. Legal. Structural. Final. The attorney exhaled slowly, then adjusted his approach. Your Honor, if the petitioner is not listed as a beneficiary, that would significantly impact any claim to future distributions, regardless of how the assets are currently classified. Exactly. That was the point he had just reached. The one I had been standing on from the beginning. The judge tapped the page lightly, once, then closed the folder halfway again. This court will require full disclosure of beneficiary designations under seal, he said. However, it is already clear that the structure in place separates control from entitlement. Separate control from entitlement. Another careful phrase. Another way of saying the outcome was not going to follow the path anyone expected when this started. Melissa's voice came again, quieter now, but sharper. Daniel, she said, am I in that trust? It was the first real question she had asked all day. Not legal. Not strategic. Personal. I turned my head slightly, meeting her eyes again. There was no anger there. No accusation. Just the need to know where she stood and something she thought she understood. I held her gaze for a second, then another. Timing still mattered. No, I said. One word. No emphasis. No explanation. Just truth. The room did not react out loud, but something shifted again, deeper this time. Not in the argument. in the reality of the situation itself. Melissa leaned back slowly, the movement controlled, but the meaning behind it clear. This was not about what she might lose anymore. It was about what she was never part of to begin with. The judge made one final note, then closed the folder completely. "We will reconvene after full review of beneficiary designations and trust compliance," he said. "At that time, the court will determine the appropriate classification and any applicable distribution." Procedural words. Formal. Necessary. But the direction was already forming beneath them. I sat back down, hands returning to their place, calm as ever. Nothing had been decided yet. Not officially. But something had been confirmed. Not by argument. Not by emotion. By structure. And structure does not change just because someone realizes it too late. The final hearing did not begin with tension. It began with clarity. Not the kind that comes from confidence, but the kind that comes when every argument has already been made and all that remains is to see what stands when everything unnecessary falls away. The courtroom felt quieter than before, not because fewer people were there, but because there was less left to say. Melissa sat beside her attorney, posture composed, but no longer leaning forward, no longer anticipating a win. She was waiting now. Waiting to understand the shape of something she could not change anymore. I took my seat across from her, the same position, the same stillness, the same calm that had carried me through every step of this process. The judge entered, and the room stood, then settled once again into that familiar silence. But this time, it felt different. Final. He opened the file, already marked, already reviewed, and did not waste time retracing steps that had already been established. "The court has completed its review of the trust structure, beneficiary designations, and the timeline of asset transfers," he said, his voice steady, precise. "What remains is to determine classification and entitlement." Classification and entitlement. Two words that now carried everything. Melissa's attorney sat upright, ready, but no longer certain. He had done what he could. He had argued intent, timing, fairness. But structure does not bend easily once it is built correctly. The judge continued, flipping to the final section. "The trust in question was established 5 years prior to the initiation of divorce proceedings," he said. "Documentation confirms that all relevant assets were transferred into this structure in a manner consistent with long-term planning, not in response to marital dissolution." He paused, letting the words settle. "Furthermore, the petitioner was aware of organizational changes within the business, though not directly engaged in the ownership framework itself." Melissa's eyes lowered briefly, not in defeat, but in recognition. Not everything needs to be said out loud to be understood. As such, the judge continued, "The court finds that the assets held within the trust are not subject to standard marital division in the manner initially claimed." There it was. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. Her attorney exhaled slowly, the last piece of resistance leaving with it. There was nothing to counter. Nothing to reinterpret. The structure had already answered the question before it was ever asked. The judge turned one last page. "Regarding beneficiary designation," he said, "the court acknowledges that the petitioner is not listed as a beneficiary, and therefore holds no entitlement to future distributions under the terms of the trust." Melissa did not react immediately. No sudden movement. No visible shock. Just stillness. The kind that comes when the full picture finally locks into place. Not what she thought she would lose, but what she had never actually held. The judge closed the folder completely this time. "Any remaining personal assets outside of the trust will be addressed separately," he added. "However, the primary holdings referenced in this case are not subject to division." He set the file aside. "This concludes the court's determination on these matters." No gavel. No dramatic ending. Just closure. I remained seated for a moment, letting the silence settle one last time. Not because I needed to. Because I understood what it meant. Melissa turned her head slightly, not toward her attorney this time, but toward me. There was no anger in her expression. No accusation. Just a quiet realization that had finally caught up to her. I met her eyes briefly, not with satisfaction, not with victory, but with something simpler. Understanding. Then I stood, adjusted my sleeve one last time, and walked toward the exit. The same hallway. The same lights. The same quiet echo of footsteps. But this time, there was no uncertainty left behind me. Because in the end, nothing had been taken. Nothing had been lost. It had simply been revealed for what it always was. The parking lot outside the courthouse felt different from the one I had walked into weeks ago. Same concrete, same rows of cars, same afternoon light stretching across windshields like nothing had changed. But everything had. I stepped out into the open air and paused for a second, not because I needed to, but because it was the first moment in a long time that did not belong to a process, a hearing, or a decision waiting to be made. It just belonged to me. The doors behind me opened again, and I heard her footsteps before I turned. Melissa stopped a few feet away, not rushing, not hesitating, just standing there like she was still deciding what this moment meant. "So that is it?" she asked. Her voice was not sharp anymore. It was quieter. Controlled. But underneath it, there was something else. Not anger. Not even disappointment. Just the weight of understanding settling in. I looked at her, really looked, without the distance of a courtroom between us. "That is how it ends," I said. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but it did not carry any humor. "You knew," she said. "From the beginning you knew how this would go." I considered that for a second. Not to find an answer. To make sure it was the right one. "I knew how it could go," I said. "So I made sure I would not be guessing when it mattered." She nodded slowly, like she was replaying everything backward, looking for the moment where it all shifted. 5 years, she said again, softer now. "You changed everything 5 years ago." I did not correct her. It was not about correction anymore. It was about clarity. "I built something that could stand on its own," I said. "No matter what changed around it." She looked away briefly, toward the street, where cars moved past without noticing either of us. "I thought I was walking away with something," she admitted. "I thought I had it all figured out." I nodded once. "That is usually when things are the least clear," I said. She turned back to me, searching my face again, like she was trying to find the version of me she used to understand. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked. It was not a legal question. Not strategic. Just personal. I held her gaze for a moment, then answered honestly. "If things had stayed the same, it would not have mattered," I said. "But things do not stay the same." She absorbed that without arguing, without pushing back. Because at this point, there was nothing left to challenge. Only things to accept. The wind moved lightly across the lot, carrying the distant sound of traffic, the ordinary rhythm of a world that does not pause for anyone's outcome. "So what happens now?" she asked. The same question as before, but it meant something different this time. Not about the case. About everything after it. I adjusted my sleeve one last time, the motion familiar, grounding. "Now we move forward," I said. "Separately." She nodded slowly, like she had expected that answer but still needed to hear it. "You really stayed calm through all of this," she said, almost to herself. I allowed a small pause before responding. "Calm is not about not feeling anything," I said. "It is about knowing when something is already decided." She looked at me one last time, and for a brief second, there was something there that felt close to recognition. Not of what we were, but of what had changed. Then she stepped back, giving space without saying it out loud, and turned toward her car. No dramatic exit. No final words. Just distance, growing one step at a time. I watched her go for a moment, then turned in the opposite direction. Not because I needed to leave quickly. Because there was nothing left to stay for. The building behind me, the courtroom, the arguments, the expectations, all of it had served its purpose. And now it was over. I walked across the lot, each step steady, unhurried, the same way I had walked into every room before this one. But this time, there was no weight behind it. No uncertainty waiting ahead. Because in the end, nothing I had built was ever taken. It was never hers to take. And that was something I had known long before anyone else even thought to ask.